Our mind is not the problem. It's our default setting to obey it without question, without perspective. The mind is one of the best examples of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it is so powerful to help us solve the problems that we face in the day-to-day, and on the other hand, its same ability to solve problems is what can keep us stuck in the things we don't want to be doing. Today we're going to open up the 4 things that stop us from doing what we really want to do, and we're going to start with number 1. Number 1 is that we listen and obey what the mind says. The best way I think to explain this is to use an example. So I'm going to introduce you to a gentleman called Shane. Shane was a 47-year-old man who had worked in the same job for about 15 years. He worked very hard. Shane was offered a promotion 3 times across those 15 years. And on each occasion, despite the fact that he really wanted to learn and to grow in his role, Shane declined the promotion. So the question is, why did Shane do that? And the first thing I'm going to put forward today is his mind convinced him not to do it. Whenever Shane would be offered a promotion, hear thoughts in his mind like, you can't do that, or it'll be too hard, you'll let people down, what if you fail, you've been a phony all this time, you're not up to the task. Thoughts like that would play through his mind, and the funny thing is these thoughts were not new to Shane. He'd had them all his life. He'd experienced these thoughts not only in his work, but in things like his friendships, in looking after his health, in taking initiative with anything. You can see the thing that can happen to us is every time we want to take a step to do something that we care about, like Shane, or every time we want to step away from a behavior pattern that we keep getting stuck in, there's this thing here in our mind that we tend to listen to and obey, and with good reason, because this mind has helped us through so many things, through so many challenges, that the problem-solving ability of our mind has been so helpful, sometimes for our literal survival. Let's talk a bit about why the mind actually does this. As we go through life, when we experience pain, the mind comes in with a way to protect us from that pain. The mind's orientation is primarily on survival. I mean, think about it this way. Imagine there was a crocodile that was chasing you, and let's imagine you were in a lake. For whatever reason, you were swimming in a lake and a crocodile started to pursue you. In that moment, the mind would be focused on helping you survive. The fight or flight system would switch on, and your primary aim would be to get out of that area and get to safety. Even if there was the most beautiful fruit nearby, like let's say you love mangoes or strawberries or watermelon, no matter what fruit you love, even if that was on the road to escape, you would probably not stop. The mind would probably not focus on fulfillment. It would focus on survival. And rightly so in that moment, because there's a literal threat chasing you. So point 1 is that the mind is oriented to avoid what is bad more than it is to pursue what is good, which makes a lot of sense when we're trying to survive life. However, the same mind that tries to survive what's threatening is the same mind that's there that we listen to, even in situations that are actually not inherently threatening physically. So what happened to Shane that his mind is convincing him to run from the promotion in a similar fashion to how we would run away from a crocodile? Well, the answer lies a little bit in his history. See, Shane grew up as one of 3 children, the youngest in his family. Shane was often criticized by his older brothers because he wasn't as fast as them, he wasn't as smart as them, and he was often teased and put down by them. In Shane's story, one day he finally built the courage to go and speak to his parents about his experience with his brothers. And his parents told him, Shane, sometimes you just get the bad genes. And so Shane grew up with a perspective that he is inadequate, that he is defective. So Shane's foundation was set from a young age. A truth was learned that he is a failure. And so the mind being, like we said, the problem solver, the solution giver, if being a failure is a problem to avoid, as Shane learned, that he is a failure, in order to protect himself through life, he would have to find a way to avoid failure. A good, healthy mind helps us to avoid what is dangerous. So Shane, in that moment, his mind, his childlike mind even, comes up with a solution. As long as I don't try, I can never actually fail. As long as I never put in any effort, or as long as I never stand out, as long as I never voice what I want to say, then I'll never fail and I'll never be seen as a failure. So the mind, in these moments of our life, these critical moments, our mind does what is completely rational, completely logical, and I would add completely pathological, that if we follow that advice, that we get to the end of our life, and the best thing we can say is, I avoided the things that I was afraid of. Because that's the mind's orientation. Survival is not fulfillment. These are two ends of the spectrum. If I summarize what I'm saying here, one of the core things keeping us stuck in doing what we don't want to do is that we listen and obey our mind. Our mind is not the problem. It's our default setting to obey it without question, without perspective. So here we see there are two layers of thought that can keep us doing the things we don't want to do, two layers of thought that can prevent us from doing the things we want to do. The first layer is those surface level thoughts, the thoughts that play through your mind consciously in the moment. Thoughts like Shane had, that I can't do it, it's too hard, what if I fail, I'll let everyone down. These are the thoughts that we essentially become one with them, and they drive our behavior as if it was us. The second layer of thinking here is the rule that we've signed on to. For Shane, it was the rule that as long as I never try, I will never fail. So the contract he signed is to live a life of not trying. There are the surface level thoughts and there are the self-protective rules. These rules are trying to protect us from a particular experience that we have learned is threatening. You know, there are a number of experiences that we might be able to identify that our mind has defined as the crocodile to escape. For some people, it might be rejection or embarrassment. For others, it might be like Shane, inadequacy and failure. It might be loneliness. For others, it might be unpredictability or uncertainty. Whatever the case, our mind at some point learns what is bad, and we develop a rule to prevent ourselves ever experiencing that thing. In doing so, the fine print of that contract is that we persist with behaviors that aren't working for us in the context of our values. One of the nicest analogies I heard about this is from a gentleman named Professor Stephen Hayes. He speaks of this analogy saying life is kind of like a time where you go out with a glass of water and you're filling it up and you're thirsty and you're ready to drink, and just as you're about to drink, the glass slips out of your hand and cracks all over the floor and breaks, and it cuts your foot and it hurts. And in that moment your mind comes in. The problem solver, the solution giver comes in and says, from now on, no more liquids. As long as you don't drink, you'll never get hurt. Herein lies the challenge that we face, is that our minds do what is rational, logical, and will absolutely keep us stuck doing things that don't work if we obey them without perspective. You know, these videos are not intended to replace working with a psychologist or counselor or someone on these things, but hopefully to shed a bit of light that mental health is not a disease, it's a human experience. We all have these patterns of behavior. We all have these rules and thoughts that we're trying to navigate through in order to live a life that's fulfilling. Here's a little exercise that I hope can be of some use to you. Take a moment to think about the things that you do that you don't want to do. Or take a moment to think about the things that you want to do that you don't see yourself actually doing. See if you can just pause for a moment and imagine stepping outside of yourself. Imagine just stepping outside of your mind and watching it. Or imagine listening to your mind as if it was a radio. And see if you can pause this video and just write down some of the thoughts you notice that your mind says about this particular thing. When you're feeling upset, when you're feeling hurt, you might notice that you react with irritation or frustration. I wonder if you can pick up thoughts that are underlying there. Like thoughts, what does your mind say? I can't believe that they did this. Why don't they care? What's wrong with it? Maybe there's thoughts about you. What's wrong with me? What are the thoughts that you notice that play through your mind just at that point where you continue with the unworkable behavior, or where you don't follow through with the workable behavior that you want to be doing? What does your mind actually say in that moment? And when you look at the list of thoughts that you can see coming through, This takes a little bit more discernment, and sometimes it's helpful to do this part with a therapist to help you actually explore this. I wonder if you can find the underlying rule, the underlying contract that you've signed in this sense. So just as a personal example to share that hopefully can help you reflect on yourself. Growing up, I was the youngest in my family, and I was a bit overweight as a kid, so not often picked for things. I wasn't the one at the top of the class, and I wasn't the one at the bottom of the class. I was kind of always just coasting somewhere in the middle. I remember one night, when I had gone to sleep and I had some friends or some cousins sleeping over. I woke up in the middle of the night, and as I went to the bathroom, I turned on the light and I saw all over my body was just all this drawing. Like throughout the night, they had just probably had some fun and taken a texture and drew different. I don't really remember what they drew, but I remember just feeling this sense of embarrassment and insignificance, almost like I wasn't in on this joke. I was the joke, and I remember. I don't know if it was. I wouldn't say from that point on, but I think that stands out as a moment to me when my mind came up with a solution to avoid ever feeling this way. And the solution was to be good at everything that I did, and from then on, being good at things became the rule that I followed. Whether it was I started to exercise, get fit, play sport, do well at school, go to uni, and be the best in everything. My mind knew that if I could be the best, that I'm never going to be insignificant again. And I guess I see that when we sign this contract, whatever it is, it might be completely acceptable and even praised by the world, by the society around us. The question is it working in the context of your values? In the way that you're pursuing this rule, in the way that you're maintaining this contract, is it working for you in the life that you really want to live? Here's a little exercise you can use to help get some distance from the thought so that you're not automatically listening and doing whatever your mind says. So take a thought for a moment and write it down just as it is. For example, the thought might be, I am going to fail, or people will judge me badly, or I am not good enough. Whatever it is that your mind tells you that you notice gets in the way. Let's take the thought, I am a failure, like Shane. So write that thought down just as it is, I am a failure, and just notice it. Say it out loud to yourself and notice what that feels like when you hold the thought in this form, I am a failure. So on a second line now, I want you to write the words, my mind is having a thought that. So notice what happens when you say the second line followed by the first line. So my mind is having the thought that I am a failure. And just notice what happens to your experience of that thought, how that thought feels when you hold it this way. Now add a third line, which is the words, I am noticing that. I am noticing that. So we have, I am a failure, my mind is having the thought that, and I am noticing that. 3 lines. Now, say line 3, followed by line 2, followed by line 1. So, I am noticing that my mind is having a thought that I am a failure. I wonder what you notice when you hold a thought this way. This is a technique in ACT called Defusion. It's a fancy way of saying how to unhook from our thoughts and see thoughts as advisors to be heard rather than dictators to be obeyed. And that's the process that we work on here with the Harvest Clinic when it comes to how to deal with thoughts. See, I don't really know a way to stop a thought. I don't really know a way to change a thought for good. You can try positive thinking, but it doesn't delete the other thought. It just gives you another thought. So our approach is, rather than trying to give you more work to do with your thoughts, instead, it's about learning to hold thoughts differently so they don't have as much impact and control over what you do in your life. And we allow that to be dictated to by the heart, by your values and by what really matters to you. So I hope today has been a little bit insightful to you. I hope there's something in here that you can use and continue to contemplate. As always, reach out to our clinic, and our clinicians are here to do this sort of work. We value this sort of work with you. And next week, we're going to talk about the second thing that stops us from doing the things we don't want to do. Thanks, and I'll see you next week on the couch.